Hey everybody, Will here. Take number 6. This is really hard to get into the 5-minute range. So, I call this weekdays with Bernie. Bernie is a student. It's an alias that I have. I had him a couple years ago, and when he was a sophomore in my government and economics classes. And back then, for the most part, he was engaged, raised his hand, asked questions. I'd ask questions to the class, and he'd even give answers, even if they weren't right, and he'd actually guess, like, is it this? And I just really respected his willingness to make the effort and put himself out there and actually learn. He has things that he was curious about. So he wasn't necessarily the best student a couple years ago as far as getting straight A's and turning in all of his work, but he was, in my opinion, a good learner, which to me is the most important part. However, coming up on this year, I have him again, and the behavior that I saw the first few weeks of school was that right there. I don't know if you can see my finger, but yeah, that picture up there. Head down, completely disengaged, like no engagement whatsoever. Come in immediately, put head down. I'd try to shake him awake and then just grunt at me and go back to sleep. That's not an actual picture of him, but it's a stock photo I found. So I decided, let's try, first off, let's figure out what's going on. Kind of like what Dr. Oka was saying early in one of her lectures. Another strategy is to acknowledge how students feel, and involves adopting their perspectives, being empathetic, and striving to validate their emotional experience and create opportunities for choice and self-directedness. And this is kind of the theory that I tried to unfold here. So I wanted to talk with him, be like, hey man, I'm not mad at you, but like, what's up? This is a huge change in what I saw a couple years ago. Seems like something's up. And he told me that things were pretty hectic at home, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of just responsibilities that he had. And he was pretty cagey about it, but I could definitely gather that he's got way too many responsibilities that maybe a young man of 17 shouldn't have, as far as responsibility for taking care of siblings and all kinds of stuff that he has to do that it's unfortunate that he's put in that position. So I decided to do a couple things that I'll talk to you about here in slide 3, but actually slide 4. Here's slide 3. I wanted to talk first about a couple things that I had in my mind as this was not the correct way to think. But what I thought about motivation before this case was, one, that motivation was all just about effort. Like, if you just do it, it'll be fine, you'll get it. And then that motivation, that effort that I wanted is just increased by flipping some magic switch and just deciding, okay, I just need to try to care, try to, do it. And it's interesting that, like, I knew intellectually that these things weren't correct, those two ways of thinking, but that's how I acted as if I believed. And so I realized that I hadn't really internalized those things at all. And so this case really got me to thinking more on a much broader level as far as what goes into motivation. And the first thing is, motivation is not 100% just about effort. And that effort is not increased by flipping that magic switch. If it was that easy to just be like, I decide to try now, we wouldn't have this class at all. We wouldn't need it. It wouldn't need to exist. So it's much more complicated than that. So what I decided to do for Bernie, see if I can keep this under a minute and a half. My motivational intervention was, first off, contingency contracting. That's what Dr. Wenzel calls it. To have like a verbal agreement saying, if I do this, you'll do this, and vice versa. So what I decided was, since Bernie seems so overwhelmed with things, that I'd take away the consequences of previous missed assignments, things that I already know that he knows anyway, but just he wouldn't do the work, with the promise, in exchange for the promise of starting to engage now and going forward. And if I had, if I saw him completely check out again, then I told him I'll put the zeros back. But I want to relieve you of that burden that you see as a big obstacle, and we'll try it out. And he was cool with that. He said, yeah, that makes sense. That's fair. And then the second part, I didn't talk about it yet, but he definitely has a huge aversion to writing. He's smart and he's knowledgeable and he can explain things very well verbally, but when it gets to writing it down and explaining it, I get a couple words. Even though I know he knows it, or he can explain to me and show me that he knows it, writing is a big thing, and for him. And he doesn't have an IEP or qualify for any special education things, but I suspect that a lot of absences in the past made it so he didn't meet the requirements to get the special education. So I think that there's some sort of learning disability there. But what I decided to do is, once again, if I either get nothing out of him or try something different, I said, why don't you, on some of these assignments, tell me or record, do a verbal recording like we did a muckraker project. And he was able to, instead of writing it down like I had asked most of the students to do, he did a little news recording, video recording of himself doing a little news story, and he did really good. And so just giving him a little bit that increased the authority to give him alternative ways to demonstrate his knowledge other than something that he struggles with. I haven't done that with everything, but ever since I did that, he's much more engaged. It's not perfect, but it's much better than it was. And my parting thoughts on this are that there's much more to this than even I've been able to scratch the surface with his specific case and with motivation in general. It's so much more complicated than I used to think, and I would love to and will continue to explore that further so that I can improve my practice and try to help students more get that motivation. And the last thing that I'll say that I'm still looking at is trying to not just do it one-on-one individual strategies, but more as class, as a group, to try to help increase that motivation. And it's hard because it's not cookie cutter what the reason is that students struggle with that, but something I want to look into. Thanks.